Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, Mexico's immigration crackdown. Is Mexico doing the US's dirty work or keeping Central Americans safe? Do you get the feeling that this year is the year of the refugee, the year of the migrant? So many refugee stories around the world. This one we're looking at from the Mexico perspective, and also the US, and also Central America. Lots of countries involved in this story. What do you have online, Malika?
Exactly. Well, this conversation, it was sparked by a recent article in the New York Times by reporter Sonia Nazaro. You can see this tweet here in which she says, U.S. government getting Mexico to do its dirty work. So that prompted lots of conversation from people online who work in this field. Here's one tweet to the stream from Incarni, who writes, Central American migrants are detained in the south of Mexico and deported back to their countries where they're being killed. She's tweeting us from Mexico, and of course she shows the dire circumstances some people have to face. Now we want to hear your comments and your perspective on this as well. You can tweet us with hashtag AJStream.
My name is Alex Narasta, and I'm the Immigration Policy Analyst at the Cato Institute, and I'm on the stream.
For people fleeing deadly violence and poverty in Central American countries, crossing the length of Mexico has never been easy. But now they face a Mexican government that is increasingly intolerant of unauthorized migration from the south. Since tens of thousands of Hondurans, Salvadorans and Guatemalans crossed into the US last year, Mexico has nearly doubled its detentions. It now apprehends more undocumented Central Americans than the United States. Washington is spending millions to support Mexican authorities on the border with Guatemala and Belize. It's part of a wider US-Mexican security initiative aimed largely at the drug trade. Mexico says it's trying to protect people from criminal groups and treacherous journeys, but human rights advocates say the tactics are putting them in even more danger. So, who are the winners and losers of Mexico's crackdown? With us to talk about this, Victoria Rettig is a policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute. Alejandro Estevil is the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Mexican Embassy right here in Washington, D.C. In Mexico City, Laura Carlson is Director of the Americas Program at the Center for International Policy. And on the phone from Tenosique, Tabasco, Mexico, Emily is an administrator at La 72. That's a migrant shelter. And for security reasons, she has asked us not to show her face. So guests, good to have you here. Some of the stories that we've heard about migrants and refugees getting to Mexico are unbelievable. Malika, our online community have been sharing some of them with us. Can you share one?
This is a video comment that I'll play, and I know that this story that she shares is one that other people face, but one that really makes you stop and listen. So this is Andalusia.
5 years have passed since 72 migrants were killed in San Fernando, Tamaulipas, just south of the U.S. border. And sadly, the situation has just gotten a lot worse. Central American migrants, when they come to Mexico, now are forced to take more circuitous routes because of the crackdown and are subject to further kidnappings, extortions, and rape. Women say that now, as they cross into the country, they take birth control pills, knowing that they might be raped and are hoping to prevent their pregnancy. That is what the crackdown has provoked.
So, Victoria, I know that you spoke to a woman in Guatemala who had a similar story to what Andalusia was telling us, who had just been deported. What did she tell you?
Yeah. So. Thanks for asking. So I was doing field research just a few weeks ago in Central America, in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And as part of that research, I interviewed a few deportees. And one of the groups that I interviewed had a woman in there. It was one woman and 9 men. And when I asked, so who of you has plans to go back and try again? All of them raised their hand except the woman. And when I asked her why she wasn't intending to go back, she said, well, in the long run, I am intending to go back, because I have my husband there. He's been in the US for 3 years. I want to try again. But you see, I left my child with my mother, so with her grandmother, and it's really time to go back home. And in addition, you see, I was kidnapped and I was raped in Mexico. So I really need some time to heal up. And it was the matter-of-factness with which she stated that really drove the message home that, this is an increasing protection problem that migrants are facing.
Yeah, and it's amazing how common that story is. And it's really important to note, I was down in Tapachula not long ago too, that many of those women who were reporting the rapes were raped by the police. We're not just talking about a problem of organized crime, we're talking about security forces themselves being one of the major threats to the migrants who are coming through Mexico.
Have a look here at my laptop. I'm actually just going to show you where Emily is. Here, Tennessee, and here is Guatemala. And people walk from Guatemala across towards Tennessee. Emily, what is the most remarkable story you've heard of the migrants and refugees who end up in your migrant shelter?
We're having an increase in victims of crime because there's more presence of the Institute of Migration on the main road. So that forces the migrants to go into the fields and the jungle, and the local crime groups know that. So they hang around waiting for them and they assault them. Unfortunately, we've seen a big increase in rapes.
Alejandro, how much do you know about these migrant and refugee stories, and how much they play into how Mexico deals with people when they end up in Mexico?
Well, it's important to stress that the Mexican government put in place a program for its southern border for more than a year ago, trying to tackle many of these cases and trying to deploy a more human rights-oriented law enforcement in that area, really dedicated to try to develop a more orderly border, putting in place programs of visitors, temporary for workers, for visitors, in such a way that we can have less and less of these cases. Also, we appreciate a lot the involvement of the civil society so that they can denounce some of these cases, and we can enforce in a better way a situation that is already dedicated to have an orderly border with human rights orientation in the law enforcement.
Laura?
Well, I've talked to a lot of people over the past year that the Southern Border Program has been in place. And my question is, I mean, every testimony I've heard, everyone has said that the situation of human rights and attacks, as Emily just mentioned, is worse since this crackdown or since this Southern Border Plan. So my question to Alejandro is, how are they protecting rights if all the reports are coming in saying human rights situation is worse?
I don't believe that it is worse. Maybe we are facing some cases that are very relevant, but in truth we have some other evidence, for example, in the case of the infrastructure that is better, the shelter that we provide to some of these people, the case of specialized officers that dedicate to unaccompanied children that for a time, mostly 1 year ago, was a very stressing situation. And today we have more than 500 specialists in that area that are providing shelter, food, sometimes education to that population. So yes, we have cases, but the truth is that in general terms, the situation is getting better and it's a more orderly border.
Well, if I can just add to that. So I agree with Alejandro that definitely the Mexican government has put into place some protection measures, among them, opening up some medical units along the border, and some attention centers where you have representatives of the Ministry of Health. But overall, when we look at all the actions that have been put into place under the Programa Frontera Sur, the Southern Border Program, I think we can find that it has tilted towards the enforcement side a little more than towards the protection side. We've seen a big crackdown on the freight train known as La Bestia, or the Beast, that has, as Lauren said, displaced a lot of the flows of migrants away from traditional migrant routes into more dangerous gang control.
I'm just going to show you a picture of the cargo train that goes through Mexico. There are many routes that go through Mexico, and this was quite notorious for migrants and refugees jumping on, jumping off, and even the policy around the train has changed. Can you explain that?
Sure. So, I mean, the train used to be one of the main modes of transport through Mexico, that particularly migrants that couldn't afford a smuggler would, just be able to jump on. So they would run along it and then just jump on.
Sure.
And now the infrastructure around it has changed. So it's actually getting more and more difficult for people just to run along the train and then jump on.
So we're talking infrastructure here, and we're talking concrete posts so that you can't actually jump on the train. Alejandro, help me out with some of this, because this is part of the policy to actually stop
Yes.
stop people from dying on the train.
Exactly. And
What
we have
else
1
is
year
there?
without one case of a mutilation or a terrible accident that we used to have in the past.
Right.
So we had to put order to that, and you see the picture from one year ago to today. Well, we have a better infrastructure. Exactly. One of the problems that provokes is that people, because of the magnet of migration which is there and is related to the opportunities that you have in the 3 countries of the northern part of Central America, start trying to go for another routes that can be more dangerous.
Not a single mutilation on the train since you put the policy in place.
True.
The train also goes faster.
Yes.
So it's harder to jump on the train.
Yes.
All right. That's what Alejandro is saying. Malika, what do you have?
Well, there's lots of criticism online about this policy and how it is now playing out. So this is David on Twitter. He says, the U.S. border policy has moved from militarizing a boundary to create layers of obstacles and enforcement, detention centers, raids on La Bestia, the train, of course, that we're talking about, and opening fire on migrants in southern border. So, Emily, I know that your center is really just a few blocks from where this train is. The people that come to you that are able to enter into Mexico, what stories are they telling you? And is there a difference between the women that you see trying to enter and the men that you see?
Yes, there is a huge increase of women, families, and families traveling with little children. We've had very recently babies as little as 2, 3, 4 months old. And I would like to bump in there about the mutilations. We did have a mutilation just a few weeks back, a boy of 19 that lost his foot. So I'm not sure if that report did not reach all the places, but we did have a mutilation here in Tennessee a few weeks back.
Alejandro, who's driving this policy? Is the US financing it? Is it helping Mexico? Are you working as a partnership?
The truth is that Mexico changed its law in 2011, and it's not a criminal activity to migrate anymore. It's only an administrative fault. And it's very important because what we started is in response to the Mexican society asking to have an orderly border. It's not related to a pressure by the United States. At the beginning of this program, there was a statement that there's money dedicated to that. Yes, there are some funds from the Iniciativa Mérida that are dedicated to some of the institutional strengthening of the Instituto Nacional de Migración. But the main resources are dedicated to organized crime, tackling organized crime activities, not to this exact program, which responds to the Mexican will to have a better border and more human rights oriented in the southern part.
There's just no question whatsoever when you look at what's really happening, because there's always a big difference in Mexican policy here for us between what a policy is announced as and what really happens. And what's happening is a crackdown. And the crackdown, you may have fewer people getting mutilated on the Bestia because they have to go to more dangerous routes. So you have what Emily reports, more crimes in other places. And the net result is a worse situation for migrants. And you hear this over and over again. And why does Mexico really care about these people coming in? They care because the United States tells them they have to care. And because it's a policy of border enforcement that we've seen on the northern border and has now been exported down to Mexico's southern border.
If I may jump in there. So I agree with Lauren that definitely the United States has an interest in Mexico enforcing its laws at the southern border. And I also agree that the United States is promoting enforcement in Mexico and supporting some of it.
Could you even say that it's like you're outsourcing border control?
Well, I would like to balance that by saying that I think that Mexico is in essence behaving like any other country in the world is behaving that is developing into a main transit and destination country. For instance, look at Europe right now. We had countries that for many years didn't receive a lot of migrants. Now they receive a lot of migrants, and all of these countries, from countries from Hungary, that has had a very closed policy throughout, to countries like Germany or Sweden that have had relatively open policies. But all of these countries in Europe are now asking, are our enforcement policies up to snuff, and how can we increase them? And all of them have put in efforts to tighten their control. So I think in answering the question that you posed at the beginning, is Mexico just doing the United States' dirty work? I think that's too simplistic a statement.
You mentioned that you were wanting to balance that out a bit, and we have a video commenter who does the same thing, but his in conclusion was that there are no winners. So Alejandro, I'm going to direct this to you. This is Pedro.
On Mexico's immigration crackdown supported by the US, I really don't believe there are any winners. I think everyone is losing, especially the migrants who are being sent back to their home countries and are risking life and limb in order to try to escape not only poverty, but also the dangers of the violence that are seen there. And I think the US has a responsibility to not use Mexico as a platform for deporting migrants who are seeking refuge and who should be able to get refugee status in the United States.
So he says Mexico is being used as a platform. How easy is it for people who are actually trying to seek refuge, who are trying to seek asylum? How is it for them to do that in Mexico?
Well, two things. The first is that Mexico has learned what migration means in terms of being a sender country by the hard way. Today, Mexico-US migration is negative. More Mexicans are coming back but we know about that. And we know that the cause of all this is the lack of opportunities and development. And the purpose of Mexico, which is not under the umbrella of any kind of US agenda, is that we are concentrated in how to provoke opportunities of development in the three countries of Central America. We are loving, even here in the United States, that all resources that can be aimed at that direction are going to be very helpful. And that's the cause of the whole thing, and that's where Mexico is concentrated. This action of the Programa Frontera Sur is dedicated to put in our law enforcement a more human rights-oriented behavior, and that's exactly what we are trying to do.
I want to share
But
our
you
audience.
didn't respond
Go ahead, Laura.
the problem of refugees, which Pedro brought up, and that's the real tragedy of what our
Refugees in the
country
case
is
of
doing
Mexico,
here.
we cannot put in place a refugee policy, and I would add here that Mexico has one of the greatest experience and policies and tradition in terms of refugee and asylum. We cannot put that in place because it's not related to the political situation in this moment.
So
These people is not asking to be refugee in Mexico.
What happens
It's
to
trying to go
refugees?
to the United States.
Asking to
People
be
are asking to be
refugees.
refugees in Mexico.
The cases that are asked in Mexico will be analyzed.
So what happens to refugees then? Refugees, people who aren't just coming through Mexico or coming to Mexico to earn more money. They're not just economic migrants, but people who are fleeing disastrous situations at home, violence at home, they just get scooped up and sent home?
No, we have in place a process of screening that we have to get it better, of course. We have learned from the cases of screening that we are putting in place between Mexico and US in the border. We have done that with the UNICEF, a very scrutinized system. We're putting that in our southern border so we can know exactly which cases are really with the basis for be a refugee case.
Victoria?
So in response to that, I would just like to add, I think if we look at numbers of people that have claimed asylum in Mexico, we see that these numbers have been relatively low. It is correct what Alejandro said, that they have put a lot of laws and processes in place. I would say that the implementation of that has not necessarily been consistent throughout.
Right.
So we're literally talking in 2014 about 1,200 people that have claimed asylum in Mexico compared to about 40,000 in the United States. So these numbers are very low, and there's different reasons for that. If you let me explain those. So, I mean, one of the reasons why the numbers are so low is that the motivation of a lot of the people that come to Mexico and are apprehended there is not necessarily to claim asylum in Mexico, but to do so in the United States, because that's where the families are. Having said that, that's only one factor. Another factor is that information is not shared consistently with people that are detained about the possibility to put in a claim.
So they have no idea that in Mexico they could claim asylum?
Quite often they don't know that
Right.
they can claim asylum, and then even if they do know they can claim asylum, they are often deterred by relatively long wait times.
All right. Let me just check in with Emily, because Emily, you're right there at a migrant shelter. What's your experience about refugees trying to claim asylum?
Well, so we've pretty much changed a lot over the last year, because where we used to be a migrant shelter where people were just traveling through, we have almost turned into a refugee camp. We have on average about 50 people that are in refugee claim status with us. So that means we have around 50 people that will be with us for about 3 or 4 months that it takes to get an answer. And unfortunately, the ones that do get refugee status in Mexico, the numbers are very, very low. We've had some very severe cases where you'd think that someone should get refugee status as a woman, for example, that was raped by the Mara gangs in Honduras, and she was turned down for refugee status. That's very difficult to help someone who suffered so much, is 8 months pregnant, and is turned down.
Wow. Malika?
And
So,
the other
Camille,
problem
when you
is-
hear stories like that, and Laura, I hear you, and I want to go to you with this next one, because when you hear these tragic stories, it begs the question, is this program working? And that's what we pose to our community members. The U.S. is spending millions to help Mexico fortify its southern border. Is it working? This is Sani, who tweets in, for the right reasons, it is a good thing. And by the right reasons, he writes, I mean putting an end to drug and human trafficking. Laura, has it actually had an effect on the drug war?
We don't have the statistics, and it's very hard to see that. But if you measure any benchmark in terms of the drug war here in Mexico, it's absolutely failing. And it's failing because of the Southern Border Plan, and it's failing because of the Merida Initiative, and it's failing because of the Mexican policy here. The drug flow to the United States changes, but it's just as high. The violence is as high or worse, even though there's some statistics that show that it's gone down some. We're seeing more disappearances. So there's no indication whatsoever that it works.
Laura, take a pause here. Alejandro?
About, well, the gap that we have to do between the narcotic problems and migration problems. First of all, well, I have to stress that Mexico faces a very difficult situation with the level of demand that is of drugs here in the United States, the level of money flowing to Mexico, the level of arms flowing and giving gunpowder to organized crime. Of course, that organized crime has moved in terrible activities from only narcotic activity to other very terrible activities. One of them is smuggling people. And that's why part of this program is trying to help the situation so that these gangs do not take profit of that.
I'm really glad you pointed that out, because our sister channel, AJ Plus, have a look here on my laptop, because you may be stopping some migrants and refugees coming in some places, and then they're actually doing other things. They might not be able to jump on the train, but have a look here. 39 Central American immigrants were found locked inside a sweltering truck parked 40 miles southwest of San Antonio. I'm going to play you this video because it's kind of amazing.
No. Uno por uno. Ahí está bien. Calma. Cálmase. Uno por uno. Uno por uno. ¿Se puede levantar? No. Ok. Deja a las mujeres que trabajen primero. Por eso.
Por favor, ayúdame.
Ok.
Se lo agradezco mucho.
Ok, quédese ahí. Apoyame. Ponte de rodillas. Todos.
So it's possible that this program might be just forcing immigrants to take more dangerous measures.
We are
did you
very
consider
clear about that, because we have experience in the case of Mexico-US relationship that when you start halting in some areas, you provoke when the demand and the magnet is there for people to migrate.
Just you move the problem somewhere else.
And we have faced that in the desert areas of Mexico, Altar Desert with Arizona, that kind of thing happens. We are facing problems of migrants from Central America going by sea. That is provoking a lot of effort by
maybe even the train.
Yes, could be very dangerous. The Navy is dedicating more resources to that areas because it's part of the problem that we are facing.
All right. Alejandra Esteville, Victoria Rettig, Laura Carlson, and Emily, who is in a migrant shelter at Last 72. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And the community says what, Malika?
I'll end with this one from Sani Nasiru, who says, consider this. Refugees flee in search of a better life. What if effort is being made so they don't have to?
We will pick up the conversation online, stream.aljazeera.com. If you can't get there right now, you can find the entire show on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody. Welcome back. We're at the online post show discussing Mexico's immigration crackdown. Alejandro, are you okay with me calling it a crackdown?
No. I would call it a program dedicated to put order in a border.
A program, let me write this down. A program dedicated to what?
To make an orderly border.
Okay, welcome back to the conversation about a program dedicated to make an orderly border. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but I understand where you're coming from. So Alejandro, you're saying this is working. In fact, let me just show you something here. These figures, these stats come from the Washington office on Latin America. So this is the year up to April 2014, and this is the year up to April 2015. The green area are Central American citizens caught in Mexico, Central American citizens caught in the United States, 49,000 to 162,000. Then 1 year later, look what happens. 92,000 caught in Mexico, 70,000 caught in the US, and the number have dropped entirely. You would say that's a result, a good result, Alejandro?
We're not thinking about this in terms of good or bad results.
Okay.
The figures, yes, they are there. In the case of unaccompanied migrants, it's quite distressing that we had in 2014 a real crisis. And most of all also was the problem that there's a different situation in terms of law if you arrive as a migrant, as a minor from Central America than a minor from Mexico. It's quite different, the treatment that you have to receive in the United States. That provoked a crisis. The program of Mexico was there and we had to enforce it the best we can, but it's not in terms of being successful, not successful. The real important thing is that we are going to aim this to human rights orientation or not, and we are really trying to do our best in that direction. Of course, a lot of faults are there, but we are trying to aim this to human rights direction.
Emily, are you seeing more people or less people coming to your shelter?
We're actually seeing a more stable flow where we're having the same numbers as last year, and where normally the numbers would fall towards the autumn. So after July, August, the numbers normally fall, and they fall quite drastically. We are maintaining the same numbers of roughly 1,000 arrivals per month. That is normally not the case from previous years. Previous years we have a big increase in the spring months, and then it goes down towards the summer, and then it keeps going down until Christmas, and then it starts again.
Do you think people have heard that it's harder now to get across the border and get into Mexico and then maybe go on to the United States? Do you think the word has got around?
Yes, definitely. They're more scared. They're definitely more worried about traveling on. They're worried about the risks that they have to take, and the people traveling with families and children and women do try to avoid taking the train. They try to travel by bus or the minibuses that we have here in the south. However, because of a lot of immigration checkpoints, it's very, very difficult for them to continue that way.
You know, Victoria, one of the things I'm seeing online that I want to pivot to now is, of course, we've seen headlines about Europe's migrant refugee crisis. There's a tweet here from David. He says, it's difficult to parse out the difference between migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. They're people who move. He goes on to say these terms are created by the state and serve its goal of trying to categorize people based on desirability. So he's talking about Mexico here, but do you see parallels between Europe's refugee crisis and what we're seeing here?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, there are a lot of differences, but there are parallels. And one of the key parallels is, of course, the question is, are our categories still useful? So the categories of what makes a refugee, what do you need to fulfill to have an asylum claim stamped yes, what makes an economic migrant, all these ideas, I mean, they date back to after the Second World War when this whole system was set up. So I think the problem that what we're dealing with primarily in both Europe and in the Americas are mixed migration flows. And that means it includes people that have a legitimate protection claim under international and national law, but it also includes people that don't have that claim. And therefore, picking these flows apart, that's the thing that makes it so difficult, that takes up so many resources, and that's what makes it so morally difficult also.
One of the things that you mentioned very briefly, Alejandro, but I think this is quite important, is a worker's card, because a lot of people are coming via Mexico, into Mexico, maybe onto the US, because they want a better life, and they're doing it for economic reasons. And there's a worker's card that you designed so people can come to Mexico and you tell your own story. Tell us.
Well, first, to migrate to Mexico is not a crime. It's an administrative fault.
Sure.
Secondly, we have a life in the border that we have to respect. There's people that commerce, that trade with one side to the other. They need a card that allows them to visit for 3 days without problem. They receive that card. We are reaching a lot. And also we need the labor that in a more integrated understanding of the region, so people can go there, have their card and work for 3 months. And that is working, is going every day better.
Right.
The success, really, we can claim success when we have opportunities for working in the complete 3 countries of that area, in the southern states of Mexico, in Mexico as a whole, and in the region for every community.
Yeah.
Is that the day we are going to say?
Is US money going towards that as well, or is it Mexico having to finance that with your neighbors?
We put money in some of the programs, most of them under what we call the Mesoamerica project.
Yes.
We are also very, very interested in the process of approval of $1 billion that Vice President Biden is going to aim towards the countries of Central America. And we are putting a lot of efforts for energy sector and also entrepreneurial sector.
And that's all for investment? None of it's going to be for border control?
No, that's for investment. That's the most important thing. We are putting in place a pipeline of gas. Just by connecting the grids of electricity from Mexico to Central America, we had an incredible diminishing in the cost of electricity for the Central American countries.
Because that's the nuance, isn't it? That's the deep question, is on why people are running away from their own countries. Laura, you're going to get the last word because I have to wrap up. Go ahead.
Well, it's certainly not true that it's not for any border control. Both Biden's billion, as they call it, and the Merida initiatives, of course, they have money for the border control efforts. And I don't see how you can not call this a crackdown. We have twice as many deportations in this first part of 2015 than we had in the same period last year. There are Navy, Army, and police checkpoints that go up to 100 kilometers inland. That means that migrants now have to dodge, scores of checkpoints just to get out of the border area. And we have these detention centers set up where people are being held for months at a time. So it certainly looks like a crackdown. And as long as we have that kind of a strategy, we're not going to resolve the human rights situation, and we're not going to resolve the migration situation.
See, I did say that was the last word, Victoria, but I fibbed a little bit. Emily, what did you want to add?
I forgot.
I heard you. I was like, I am not cutting off the woman who's at the migrant shelter. That is not going to happen. All right, Emily, you will keep us in mystery forever. Malika, what do you have?
I will end with this video comment from David.
I think one of the things that everyone needs to consider when we're talking about this migration crisis that's affecting Latin America and Central America is the violence that actually is affecting the families that are living in Central America and also in the south of Mexico. Children are fleeing because they're not secure within their own homeland, and that's where they're looking at places that might be safer.
Of course, bringing it back to the children.
Right. Also, I feel like, Victoria, you kind of really hit the nail on the head, because this is a problem that we're facing all over the world. I feel like the next few years are going to be, how do we grapple with migrants and refugees and where are our borders and how important they are? That is a big conversation, but we're having it in different parts of the world and in different situations. Thank you, Victoria, for Alejandro, for Laura, and for Emily as well for being part of this conversation. Appreciated your time on the stream. Take care, everybody.